Hello and thanks for joining me. Some of you may be able to tell that I'm not in my usual location. I am coming at you from my hotel room in New York City. I'm here for a few days, and earlier this week I was in Portland, Oregon, and I'll be back in DC for the weekend, and then I am off next week to Los Angeles for the week. So lots of travel going on for work lately, but the good side of that is I'm getting quite a bit of plane time and train time in, so that means good reading time. I am keeping up with my reading. I did want to check in and do a chat on Demian by Hermann Hesse, which is the most recent book that I finished. And I wanted to get a chat on it while it was still sort of fresh in my mind. Demian by Hermann Hesse, originally published in 1919 under a pseudonym, Emil Sinclair, who is also the main character in this novel, Demian. But Emil Sinclair, it's my understanding that that Demian did not get published under the name of Hermann Hesse for about 10 editions. So it went for about 10 editions being published under this pseudonym. The edition that I read is a 1948 edition by Henry Holt and Company with a foreword by Thomas Mann, and that foreword was dated 1947. I don't know who translated this, but this was originally, of course, a German language novel. That I couldn't find the translator listed on the cover page, on the beginning of the novel, or the copyright page, or the title page. So, not sure whose translation this was, but it is from 1948, the Henry Holt and Company translation. I'll just call it that. So why I read this, I've been reading Hermann Hesse novels, chipping away at them. This was the fourth one that I read. I read Steppenwolf. I've read The Glass-Bead Game, which I read it under the title of Magister Ludi, The Glass-Bead Game, and then I read Siddhartha last year, and so this year I got Demian read, and I put it on my priority reading list this year because it met the theme of seekers, because our young Emil Sinclair is definitely a seeker. So what it's about, I thought, for this little short work, I thought I might just read the description of the book, because it really describes really well, I think, just sort of the synopsis without giving away any spoilers. So it says, Demian follows the life of a troubled German youth as he navigates the duality of a world filled with illusions and spiritual truth. When Sinclair first meets childhood classmate Max Demian, his eyes are open to the contradictions of his existing Christian knowledge. As Sinclair continues to question his worldview, the two friends are separated and reunited throughout their lives, with each encounter being a vantage for Sinclair to reconcile a world at discord. He ascends on his path to freedom and a realization of self as the friendship evolves in surprising and explosive ways. So yeah, surprising and explosive ways. It was. I don't know that I would say explosive, but it did kind of surprise me there towards the end. But yeah, so it's about this young Emil Sinclair. He's a young boy. He starts out as a young boy. He's being bullied in school, and then there's this new guy at school, Max Demian, who's sort of a singular person. Sort of stands out as being different than the other boys. And Emil Sinclair feels drawn towards him, but he also feels like he's sort of maybe a dangerous person, so he's a little frightened of him, because I think Emil Sinclair is at that age where he's about to leave childhood behind, and he recognizes that the world he lives in with his parents, that there's another world out there that is different than the happy home that he's grown up in with, the secure and happy home with his parents. He's really reluctant to leave the security and happiness of his home as he's known it, but nevertheless, as part of growing up, this is what he ultimately needs to do, and he's drawn to it anyway because he's drawn to this sort of reconciling this knowledge of good and, well, not really good and evil, but the duality of the world, the different worlds that exist. He has another world, and he has the world that he knows. And the other is what he's drawn in to step into, but then sort of trying to reconcile that, I think, also with the world that he knows. So Yeah, he like the synopsis mentioned, his and Demian's lives sort of intersect at different times. This book, I gather, covers about 10 or 12 years in their lives, and it's really these adolescent and early adulthood years. And Sinclair actually goes on, goes on a different path and meets some other sort of another mentor, Pistorius. But what I gathered from it was that there were other seekers, and these other seekers that are different than other people, because in Sinclair's view, most people, or a lot of people, do not venture out of the secure world of their childhood. But those who do, are sort of seekers, and they can recognize each other. But his life sort of goes back and forth, and he does meet Demian on and off, and then later on, Demian's mother will also have an influence on him, and he's kind of an artist, and he draws. One thing he does is sort of draws from his subconscious. This book has Jungian elements in it. I read that Hermann Hesse was very into Jungian psychology and had read a lot of it, and so when I was reading up on this novel a little bit, apparently there's quite a bit of influence from Jungian psychology. But I was just going to show the cover again. This drawing, you see this drawing, sort of a drawing of a face, and I don't know if you can tell that this face can look directly at you, but it's also can be in profile, with one side looking at you and the other side in profile. But this is no accident, because this picture that Sinclair draws from his subconscious is this dualistic sort of androgynous person who he worships. He hangs this picture in his room. He doesn't worship it per se, but it has a deep spiritual meaning to him. And I won't go into it about how or why, but it does. There are mystical elements in this novel, as well as the Jungian psychological, subconscious sort of elements at play. The mystical part of it is Abraxas. So Abraxas, I had to look this up. The Abraxas is a Gnostic god that transcended duality. So duality, the duality of gender and the duality of worlds even, figures very, very prominently throughout this short novel. And I won't give it away. Like I said, I don't want to give away, really, I wouldn't say this book is terribly driven by spoilers, but nevertheless, it is a journey. It's a journey that we go on with Sinclair, and so I wouldn't want to detract from that in any way. And plus, I think if I were to really try to interpret it, I'd need to read it again. If I really wanted to interpret it for another audience, like you guys, I would really need to read it again, because it's very, like I said, it's very psychological and very mystical in some places. But I did enjoy it, and I love this kind of story of seekers. I think Hermann Hesse does a great job with this. This one reminded me a bit of Steppenwolf, which he published later on. So Steppenwolf might be a more mature, more expanded out version of our young Sinclair that is featured in Demian. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to bring up before I run out of time is I wanted to shout out to German viewers or German-speaking viewers, because I had something happen a while back I had a commenter on, I think it was my Steppenwolf video, my Steppenwolf book chat. I had a commenter from a German, I gathered, a German-speaking person who made this short comment. Well, the part of the comment that I was able to actually retrieve was a really short comment that says something like, Hermann Hesse would have loved your cat because he loved cats, but I think that really only German speakers can really appreciate German literature, or something to that effect, about the German language and maybe something being lost in the translation. And then when I went to read the full comment, I got that alert. I saw the alert in my emails. I get an alert, not all the time, but most of the time I'll get an alert when someone posts a comment, and I can go find the comment that way. But when I went to YouTube to try to read the whole comment, I guess the commenter had deleted it because it was no longer there, which I think is really a shame, because I'm really curious, Germans and German speakers. I've noticed on my Hermann Hesse book chats, of the different book chats that I've done, that I do get quite a lot of views from Germany and from German-speaking areas like Austria, and so I was just wondering for German speakers, what you think. I'd like to know what you all think that in the Hesse novels might not translate well to English. Those of you who've read the novels both in English maybe or in German, or maybe you're just aware of what might not get translated well. You know, I've understood through Portuguese, studying Portuguese, how some things just can't translate into English because of the way the grammar is, or because of the way that the structure is in that language, and so it's very hard sometimes to get a good translation over and for certain concepts. So I'm sure the same thing is true for German. But I really wish this commenter had not deleted their comment and had left it so that we could have had a conversation about this. So if anybody has any input about that, I would love to hear it. So before we run out of time, I did want to read a quote from this book. I have mentioned this quote before when I have talked about this book as far as announcing it on my priority reading list, but I just love this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, I think, from a Hesse novel. But it's right at the beginning of the novel, and it says, it's from Emil Sinclair, our main character. I wanted only to try to live in obedience to the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? I hear you, Sinclair. You know, if you step out, you start hearing, you're being pulled. Your inner self is pulling you in a direction that's outside of your normal safe zone that you're used to, and you're getting pulled into that world. Sometimes it's hard, and it's hard to break out of that shell. And that breaking out of a shell also pertains to the book, but I don't want to give that away too much. Breaking out of a shell. All right, so I will end the chat, I think, with that. What I am currently reading, I finished up Definitely Maybe by the Strugatsky brothers. So I went ahead and started The Last Temptation of Christ. You probably can't see this because it's got a white cover. The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis. I'm trying to get it where you can see the gold lettering. Probably can't, but yeah. The Last Temptation of Christ, I'm about 15% in. This concerns the Christian Jesus, and it's a fictionalized account of his really last, not last days, but he's already I think around 30, so I think we're getting close to the time of his crucifixion. But it is his struggle, his human part and his divine part, and I think it's so interesting because the Jesus, was part human and part divine, and so this conflict that he had, or at least that is explored in this fictionalized account. So I'm enjoying that very much. And then I went ahead before I left on this trip, since I did have quite a bit of train time. I don't think I will get finished with The Last Temptation of Christ before the weekend, but I might, just because one never knows. So I went ahead and did a drawing for my next read, and here it is. And I already know what it is, but I did want to bring it and show that the universe did choose by steppe, desert, and ocean the birth of Eurasia. This is by Barry Cunliffe. This is a history, so it's out of my priority reading theme of history, so it's one of my history selections. This starts in about 10,000 BC and then follows human movements across Europe and Asia, across Eurasia, all the way up until about 1300 as the continent, the megacontinent, was becoming the continent that we recognize today with the different movements of peoples and cultures. So I'm looking forward to diving into this history. I think this is the first of my history selections to come up in the randomness of the universe, so looking forward to that. That's it. I will have a chat on Definitely Maybe by the Strugatsky brothers coming up very soon, so stay tuned for that, okay? Take care. Bye.